This audio production was made in collaboration with Audible Anarchist.
Anarchy Works by Peter Gelderloos, Chapter 8, The Future. We are fighting for our own lives, but also for a world we might never get to see. Won't the state just re-emerge over time? Most of the examples cited in this book no longer exist, and some only lasted a few years. The stateless societies and social experiments were mostly conquered by imperialist powers or repressed by states. But history has also shown that revolution is possible and that revolutionary struggle does not inevitably lead to authoritarianism. Authoritarian revolutionary ideas such as social democracy or Marxist-Leninism have been discredited the world over. While socialist political parties continue to be parasites sucking at the vital energies of social movements, predictably selling out their constituencies every time they come to power, a diverse mix of horizontalism, indigenism, autonomism, and anarchism have come to the foreground in all the exciting social rebellions of the last decade. The popular uprisings in Algeria, Argentina, Bolivia, and Mexico, the Autonomen in Italy, Germany, and Denmark, the students and insurgents in Greece, the farmers' struggle in Korea, and the anti-globalization movement that united countries around the world. These movements have a chance of abolishing the state and capitalism amidst the crises of the coming years. But some people fear that even if a global revolution did abolish the state and capitalism, these would inevitably re-emerge over time. This is understandable, because statist education has indoctrinated us to believe the myths of progress and unilineal history, the idea that there is only one global narrative, and it led inexorably to the ascendancy of Western civilization. In fact, no one knows exactly how the state developed, but it is certain that it was neither an inevitable nor irreversible process. Most societies never voluntarily developed states, and perhaps as many societies developed states and then abandoned them as have kept them. From the perspective of these societies, the state may appear to be a choice or an imposition rather than a natural development. The timeline we use also affects our perspective. For tens of thousands of years, humanity had no use for states. And after there are no more states, it will be clear that they were an aberration originating in a few parts of the world that temporarily controlled the destiny of everyone on the planet before being cast off again. Another misconception is that stateless societies are vulnerable to being hijacked by aggressive alpha males who appoint themselves leaders. On the contrary, it seems that the big man model of society has never led to a state or even to a chiefdom. Societies that do allow a bossy, more talented, or stronger man to have more influence typically ignore him or kill him if he becomes too authoritarian, and the big man is unable to extend his influence very far, geographically or temporally. The physical characteristics on which his leadership is based are ephemeral, and he soon fades out or is replaced. It seems that states developed gradually out of culturally accepted kinship systems that coupled gerontocracy with patriarchy. Over a period of generations, older men were accorded more respect and given greater exclusivity as the mediators of disputes and the dispensers of gifts. Not until very late in this process did they possess anything resembling a power to enforce their will. We must remember that as people gradually surrendered more of their responsibilities and afforded certain members of the community more respect, they had no way of knowing the outcomes of their actions, no way of knowing just how bad hierarchical society could become. Once social elites obtained coercive powers, a new dialectic of social development emerged, and at this point, the creation of the state was likely, though still not inevitable, because the majority remained a social force with the power to dispossess the elite or stop the process. Modern societies with the collective memory of bureaucratic techniques could redevelop a state much more quickly. But we have the advantage of knowing where that path leads and being aware of the warning signs. After having fought hard to win their freedom, people would have plenty of motivation to stop the reemergence of the state if it were occurring anywhere near them. Fortunately, an anarchist society is its own reward. Many stateless societies, after colonial contact, have had the opportunity to join a hierarchical society and yet continue to resist, such as Kung, who continue to live in the Kalahari Desert, despite the efforts of the Botswana government to, quote, settle, close quote, them. There are also examples of long-lasting anti-authoritarian social experiments that thrive within statist society. In Gloucestershire, England, Tolstoyan anarchists founded the White Way Colony on 40 acres of land in 1898. After they bought the land, they burned the property deed on the end of a pitchfork. Accordingly, they had to build all their houses themselves since they could not obtain mortgages. Over 100 years later, this pacifist anarchist commune still exists, and some of the current inhabitants are descendants of the founders. They make decisions in a general assembly and share a number of communal facilities. At times, White Way has housed refugees and conscientious objectors. It has also housed a number of cooperative ventures, such as a bakery and a handicrafts guild. Despite the external pressures of capitalism and the hierarchical relationships reproduced by statist society, White Way remains egalitarian and anti-authoritarian. Across the North Sea, in Appelschach, Friesland, an anarchist village celebrated its 75th year in 2008. Currently composed of caravans, campers, and a few permanent buildings, the Appelschach site has been active in the anarchist and anti-militarist movements since the priest Domela Nieuwenhuis left the church and began preaching atheism and anarchism. A group of workers began gathering there and soon acquired land on which they have held yearly anarchist gatherings every Pentecost. Harkening back to the socialist temperance movement, which recognized alcohol as a crippling plague on workers and a form of bondage to employers who sold liquor from company stores, the camp is still alcohol-free. In 2008, 500 people from all over the Netherlands, as well as Germany and Belgium, attended the yearly anarchist gathering at Appelschach. They joined the anarchists who live there year-round for a weekend of workshops and discussions on subjects including pacifism, animal liberation, the anti-fascist struggle, sexism within the movement, mental health, and the campaign that kept the Olympics out of Amsterdam in 1992. There were children's programs, presentations on the long history of the camp, communal meals, and enough enthusiasm in the air to promise another generation of anarchism in the region. Other anarchist projects can also survive 100 years. Specific societies, communities, and organizations need not be set in stone. Anarchists do not need to enact restrictive measures to preserve institutions at the expense of their participants. Sometimes the best thing a community or organization can do for its participants is permit them to move on. There are no hereditary privileges or constitutions that must be handed down or imposed on the future. In allowing more fluidity and change, anarchist societies can last much longer. The majority of societies throughout human history have been communal and stateless, and most of them lasted for millennia until they were destroyed or conquered by Western civilization. The growth and power of Western civilization were not inevitable, but rather the result of specific historic processes, arguably dependent on geographic coincidence. The military successes of our civilization might seem to prove its superiority, but even in the absence of resistance, problems endemic to our civilization, such as deforestation and climate change, may well bring about its demise, revealing it to be an utter failure in terms of sustainability. Other examples of unsustainable hierarchical societies, from Sumer to Easter Island, show how swiftly a society apparently at its pinnacle can collapse. The idea that the state will inevitably reemerge over time is another of those hopelessly Eurocentric fantasies in which Western culture indoctrinates people. Dozens of indigenous societies around the world never developed states. They thrived for thousands of years. They have never surrendered. And when they finally triumph against colonialism, they will cast off the impositions of white culture, which includes the state and capitalism, and revitalize their traditional cultures, which they still carry with them. Many indigenous groups have experienced going back hundreds or even thousands of years of contact with the state, and at no point have they voluntarily surrendered to state authority. Western anarchists have much to learn from this persistence, and all people from Western society should take the hint. The state is not an inevitable adaptation, it is an imposition, and once we learn how to defeat it for good, we will not let it come back. What about other problems we can't foresee? Anarchist societies will face problems we cannot possibly foresee now, just as they will encounter difficulties we might predict but be unable to solve without the historical laboratory that revolution provides. But one of the many errors of the state is the neurotic supposition that society is perfectible, that it is possible to craft blueprints that provide for all problems before they occur. Favoring laws over case-by-case evaluation and common sense, maintaining a standing army, granting the police emergency powers on a permanent basis, all these stem from the paranoia of statism. We cannot tie down the contingencies of life in a blueprint, nor should we. In an anarchist society, we would have to invent entirely new solutions for wholly unpredictable problems. Should we earn the opportunity, we will do so with joy, getting our hands dirty in the complexities of life, realizing our vast potential, and reaching new levels of growth and maturity. We need never again surrender the power to solve our own problems in cooperation with those around us. Making anarchy work. There are a million ways to go about attacking the interconnected structures of power and oppression and creating anarchy. Only you can decide which paths to take. It's important not to let your efforts be diverted into any of the channels that are built into the system to recuperate and neutralize resistance, such as requesting change from a political party rather than creating it yourself, or allowing your efforts and creations to become commodities, products, or fashions. To free ourselves, we need to regain control over every aspect of our lives: culture, entertainment, relationships, housing and education and healthcare, the way we protect our communities and produce food, everything. Without getting isolated in single-issue campaigns, figure out where your own passions and skills lie, what problems concern you and your community, and what you can do yourself. At the same time, stay abreast of what others are doing so you can build mutually inspiring relationships of solidarity. There may already be anti-authoritarian groups active in your area. You could also start your own group. One great thing about being an anarchist is you don't need permission. If there's no one you could possibly work with, perhaps you could be the next Robin Hood. That position has been vacant far too long. Or if that's too tall in order, start smaller with something like making graffiti, distributing literature, or running a small DIY project until you've built up experience and confidence in your own abilities and met other people who want to work alongside you. Anarchy thrives in the struggle against domination, and wherever oppression exists, resistance exists also. These struggles do not need to call themselves anarchist to be breeding grounds for subversion and freedom. What is important is that we support them and make them stronger. Capitalism and the state will not be destroyed if we consign ourselves to creating wonderful alternatives. Once upon a time, the world was full of wonderful alternatives, and the system knows quite well how to conquer and destroy these. Whatever we create, we must be prepared to defend. No one book is enough to explore all the possibilities of anarchist revolution. Here are several others you might find helpful. Recommended reading: Crime Think, Recipes for Disaster, an Anarchist Cookbook, Olympia, Crime Think, Workers Collective, 2005, and Expect Resistance, Salem, Crime Think, Workers Collective, 2008. Kuwasi Balagoon, A Soldier's Story, Writings by a Revolutionary New African Anarchist, Montreal, Kersplebedeb, 2001. Anne Hansen, Direct Action, Memoirs of an Urban Guerrilla, Toronto, Between the Lines, 2002. Lorenzo Camboa Irvin, Anarchism and the Black Revolution, second edition online at infoshop.org, 1993. Emma Goldman, Living My Life, New York, Knopf, 1931. Richard Kempton, Provo, Amsterdam's Anarchist Revolt, Brooklyn, Autonomedia, 2007. Bami Baumann, translator Helene Ellenbogen and Wayne Parker, How It All Began, a personal account of a West German urban guerrilla, Vancouver, Pulp Press, 1977. Trapeze Collective, edited Do-It-Yourself, A Handbook for Changing Our World, London, Pluto Press, 2007. Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, Outlaw Woman, a memoir of the war years 1960 to 1975, San Francisco City Lights, 2001. A.G. Schwartz and Boyd Network, We Are an Image from the Future, The Greek Uprising of December 2008, Oakland, AK Press, 2010. Easy Morgan Muffle and Paul Sharkey, editors, Beating Fascism, Anarchist Anti-Fascism in Theory and Practice, London, Kate Sharpley Library, 2005. Call, Appel in the original French, an anonymous manifesto with no publication information given. The article or zine or book that you are going to write to share your experiences with the world and expand our collective toolbox. It works when we make it work. The many people who conspired to commit these rebel stories to paper and get them into your hands have been thoughtful enough to provide you with one parting example of anarchy, the book itself. Imagine the decentralized network, the harmonious chaos, the confluence of liberated desires that made it possible. With passion and determination, millions of people breathed life into the stories we present, and many of them struggled even past the point of certain defeat in the hopes their utopias might inspire future generations. Hundreds of other people documented these worlds and kept them alive in our minds. A dozen more came together to edit, design, and illustrate the book, and even more collaborated with proofreading, printing, and distributing it. We have no boss, nor are we getting paid to do this. In fact, the book is priced at cost, and our goal in distributing it is not to make money, but to share it with you. Publishing is an enterprise we were supposed to leave to the professionals, and books were something we were supposed to buy and consume, not to make ourselves. But we forged ourselves the permission slip to pursue this project, and we hope to show that you can too. It can be tempting to present such ambitious projects as magically final products, leaving the reader to guess how we did it, and reveling in the illusion ourselves. However, sometimes it's better to let an inopportune gust of wind blow in, sweep up the curtains, and reveal the machinations backstage. This book, then, proves to be no different from all the other examples illuminated herein, in that its creation was also a matter of constructive conflict. The collection of people immediately responsible for publishing it is not a homogeneous circle, but rather includes editorial groups with distinct modes of operation, and a primary author for whom writing is an individual activity. Because of differing needs and opinions, some people could not see this project through to its end. But as anarchists, they were free to leave the group when it was in their interests, and they had already affected the manuscript in good ways. Meanwhile, thanks to a flexibility of organization, the project could go forward. As the individualist in this group, I learned and developed in ways I would not have had I been working in an authoritarian group. With a traditional publisher, I would be forced to concede whenever a disagreement arose, not because I had been convinced of their point of view, but because they controlled more resources and could determine whether the book would make it to print or not. But with our horizontal arrangement, I could receive criticism that I knew was intended to develop the book to its uttermost potential, rather than just to make it sell better in a dumbed-down market. Granted, publishing a book is not the most amazing achievement, and the wee paper thing, feisty as it is, certainly isn't about to storm the Winter Palace, but one of our most basic points is that anarchy is much more commonplace than we've been led to believe. And hell, if we can make it work, so can you. Also, like the other stories we've been told here, the story of our storytelling contains its own weaknesses. We'd like to be the first to point them out. Unavoidably, a couple things are missing. One is a matter of realism. While making this book, we've tried not to romanticize the examples, though clearly these pages do not provide the space for a full analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of each cited revolution or social experiment. However, we wanted to give some indication of the abundance of complexities and difficulties lurking beneath the surface of every example of anarchy. But if the book is at all successful, if you readers do not simply say, "Oh, that's nice, anarchy is possible," and then go back to your lives, but instead you actually arm yourselves with this knowledge to plunge into the creation of an anarchist world, you will quickly discover for yourselves how difficult it is. The truth is, sometimes anarchy doesn't work. Sometimes people don't learn how to cooperate, or a certain group never finds a way to share responsibilities, or infighting leaves an entire movement flat-footed and unable to survive the grave pressures of the world around it. Even some of the examples described in this book eventually fell apart due to their own internal failings. In other cases, a liberated community will be brutally repressed. A squatted social center creating a bubble of freedom from state and capital will be kicked out by the landlord, or the state will find some other excuse to lock you up for participating in the struggle to create a new world. Many people who fought for anarchy ended up dead and defeated, or simply demoralized. And their sacrifices will not be celebrated unless we write that history ourselves, to learn from their failures and be inspired by what they won. Another failing of this book is that we have not been able to romanticize these examples enough. I'm afraid our meekly attempted objectivity omits how inspiring it feels to put anarchy into practice, despite all the difficulties. The stories here are real, on a level deeper than the footnotes the chronicle of dates and names can express. Some of these stories I have lived myself, and they are wrapped up in the very writing of the book. The tedious satisfaction of organizing info shops and learning how to use consensus in defiance of the stifling psychological terrain of the United States was my inspiration for starting a book about what an anarchist world would actually look like. Though I still haven't finished that project, it led me to research what anarchy already had looked like. On a park bench in Berlin, taking a break from studying the autonomous movement of that city, I sketched an outline for this new book, and a couple weeks later, in Christiana, I saw how an entire neighborhood living in anarchy seems perfectly ordinary. It occurred to me that I might encounter many more living histories if I looked. Over the next year, I went to a 75-year-old anarchist camp in the Netherlands and waded into a continuity of struggle in which the past does not imprison the present, but fertilizes it. I stood in provincial Ukrainian towns that once overthrew authority and tried to imagine how they looked, gardened in an anarchist village in the mountains of Italy, and felt down to my very bones what the abolition of work means. As I traveled, I corresponded with one of my best friends as he went off to Oaxaca for 6 months and participated in the rebellion there. Appropriately enough, I finished my writing in a squat in Barcelona, where I was stuck awaiting trial and threatened with prison time after a police frame-up. The park down the street used to be the city jail, but the anarchists tore it down in 1936. In 2007, our social center took it over in protest of our impending eviction, setting up a free store, putting out a selection of books from our library, telling stories to the children. Unexpectedly illegalized, I found my housing and food tied up with the network of liberated spaces throughout the city. And these spaces, in turn, depended on all of us fighting to create and defend them. The same is true of all the other histories we've seen. None of them owe their existence to spectators. These stories that show that anarchy can work, but we have to build it ourselves. The courage and confidence we need to do this cannot be found in any book. They already belong to us. We only have to claim them. May these stories jump off their pages and into your hearts and find new life. Peter Gelderloos, Barcelona, December 2008. end of Anarchy works.
This has been a production of Audible Anarchist. You can find more Audible Anarchist on YouTube.